Okay.
Okay, well, I will officially call the special meeting of the Board of Trustees to order. The one agenda item for tonight is review and adoption of the plan for reform and reimagining of the Irvington Police Department. To give some background, tonight we're going to be considering 56 recommendations developed by 29 members of the Irvington Police Policy Review Committee. Contained in this plan are the product of a multi-month collaboration between a diverse cross-section of community stakeholders, including law enforcement professionals, public servants, public defenders, and concerned citizens. These members were convened to review the current state of the Irvington Police Department and to reimagine it. This was an opportunity to continue improving policing and community police relations through investment in its best practices in law enforcement. We said from the beginning that this was not a witch hunt, and in the end, it was not a witch hunt. We worked side by side with our Irvington Police Department. This plan is the first step in an ongoing endeavor towards reaching the goal. It's organized into three main sections: background detailing the structure of the committee, including its meetings and presentations, a description of the 56 recommendations made by the committee, and community and police officer surveys. Many hours of research, discussion, and analysis produced a series of recommendations voted on and ultimately supported by a majority, and in some cases, all of the committee members. These recommendations are organized by subject areas. There are a total of 7 of them. This plan would not have been achievable without the full support of the IPD and the chief, retired Mike Cerrone, and Lieutenant Francis Pignatelli, who is now our chief. So we'd like to thank not only the chief and the retired chief, but all the members of IPD who gave so much of their time and served as invaluable members of the committee as we formed it. I actually think if we had not included them as our side-by-side members, this would have been half of the document that it is today. Maybe not in length, but in importance. I also, have to thank our facilitators. Mayo and Maria were unbelievable. I don't think when Larry and I were talking about doing this, back in June of 2020, we could even envision how the process would work. But I think once we kind of had decided, and I actually have to thank Janice too for helping us find the facilitators. But Mayo Bartlett, who had also worked with the county, seemed like a no-brainer when we met him, and Maria Imperial was such a great facilitator for us that honestly I don't know how we would have done it, because we wanted to, something that we were trying to achieve was to not have this be the mayor's task force or the administrator's task force or the police chief's task force. We really wanted this to be a community group that worked with all of those other people, but all the voices were kind of equal, and all the voices were trying to pull the same way and improving our police department for not just the residents, but most importantly for me, for the members of the police department as well. And I think for a large part, for the most part, I think we've accomplished that goal. I think the only thing that I thought was unfortunate was the tight time frame that we worked under. And that was really because after we had kind of committed to this, the governor said we had to do it. So he has a deadline of April 1st. So we do have a few days if we had to change something. But I think that the tight time frame, maybe it helped focus us, but there were definitely a lot of nights and many hours put in by the committee that were truly Herculean at some points, and the amount of heavy lifting that a small group of people did was really tremendous and appreciated. So I just wanted to thank everyone that was a member of this committee. We had a wide a diversity of views, and I think again that made it a much better report. I thought the surveys were also super helpful, both the internal police department survey as well as the community survey. I think it reinforced a lot of our views that generally the police department is very well received, very well respected, and it also allowed us to focus on a few areas that we could improve. So again, I think the overall product is much better than I expected, and I didn't know what I was expecting when we started on this project, but I think also it was just the dialogue we were able to have with the community and the police department was invaluable as well. So I think that those conversations were something that you couldn't have had it work out any other way. It was very kind of organic, and it became natural at the end, even though we were on Zoom, and it was not as, again, the circumstances weren't great, but again, the product I think speaks for itself. I'm not going to read most of the sections of it, and because the document completely stands on its own. But what I think I am going to do tonight is I'm going to go through the recommendation section, allow the village board and administrator to discuss it, and then we'll open it up for comments from anyone in the audience that has something they'd like to add or ask about. Again, these aren't all completely thought out plans that we're going to have a immediate reaction. A lot of these are things we'd like the state to do for us. These are things that we want the police department to work towards. These aren't all completely hashed out ideas. Some of these are just that, ideas and goals for the police department, or for the New York State for that matter. So I guess before I get to the recommendations, did anyone else from the board want to say anything? Because it was such an undertaking, and the amount of meetings in a very short time frame was remarkable. So and thanks to the board for all their time on this as well.
Brian, I just wanted to clarify, both for myself and the public, our role tonight is we need to certify this, or we need to approve it in order for it to go to the governor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if it happened that there were any changes in anything tonight, what's the process? I mean, if we say, yeah, we approve this as is, Larry Schaffer sends it off to the governor.
Yeah.
What happens if we don't?
Well, I think my understanding is we can kind of adjust it any way we like, and then whatever we approve, it'll be what we said. Strike all of page 10. We could adopt it with page 10, gone from the record. Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically we can do whatever we want tonight. We can reject recommendations that were recommended. We can approve recommendations that weren't recommended. Obviously that's kind of up to us, but that's my understanding. If we can basically do whatever we want, but
right. And just to put it in perspective, so the executive order requires that it be filed and with a certification signed by the chief executive, which is the mayor, that it be filed by April 1st. There were no penalties listed, if I recall correctly, in the executive order. However, in each of the individual budgets that have been introduced into the legislature in Albany, so the governor's budget, the assembly budget, and the Senate budget. I think to a lesser extent the assembly budget, but each of the other budgets have proposed penalties for not filing this on time. We don't know what they're going to be, but they can range from loss of state aid or something else. We don't know. That's a fluid process, of course. But the point is that there should be at this point no reason for this board to not adopt something. You can make some changes to it. I'm going to make the assumption that those changes will be talked about tonight, and we can reflect that in the resolution of adoption and ultimately in the underlying text if we have to make a change. But again, it's a fluid process. So let's talk our way through it and let's see what the net result is.
Okay, that's very helpful. So is there a public meeting that would be necessary to, review a change, or it could just happen? Yeah. Okay.
This is it.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
this is your public meeting. You've had, there's been other options for feedback by the public. But this is your public meeting to adopt it. I mean, it's not out of the question that you would schedule another public meeting beyond this, because it's not April 1st yet. But this is the intention, is to make this the meeting. So let's go through it and see where we end up.
goes.
Yeah.
Not to apply either way that I think I just wanted to clarify for myself and for the public why we're here tonight, and that the April 1st, I think there's no need to have to go beyond April 1st. So I think we can handle that.
So Larry, I know in my copy of the PDF document, there are a couple of minor formatting issues or typos, and you mind if I bring those up as we go into the sections just to make sure that you've seen them? Or,
Sure.
or do you have a further cleaned up version?
I mean, the version was issued in draft form on Tuesday with the agenda and was finalized by the committee yesterday. And there were some changes made to formatting between the draft and the final. So
I'm looking at
you
the
have
latest
both.
document that you circulated, not the
The
draft.
latest one would have been the final. Yep.
Yeah,
So there were a couple really minor, but
2024, 2021. Is that the one everybody's looking at? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I had two minor ones that I gave to Larry.
Yeah. No, whatever you have, it's fine. It's, we want to make it as correct as possible.
So I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we got started. One, I know Brian said that we can do whatever we want to, but let's keep in mind that a lot of work was done and a lot of discussion was had about a lot of these issues, and a lot of compromise was made. And I'm not sure how fair it is for the board to make wholesale changes or add things that hadn't been in there before. That said, Brian also alluded to the fact that we were on a very tight schedule, and I did my darndest to attend as many meetings as I could, and I still missed meetings. And if you missed a meeting, you very likely could have missed a section. You could have missed something that is in there. There are things I see, in here that I don't remember the discussions about, and it's probably because I missed a few. And it was difficult to make them all. I just want everyone to recognize that, having meetings at 5 p.m. and meetings at 2 p.m, while every effort was made to share the burden, and that was really the only way. I think that everyone agreed that that was the only way to do it. It did make it difficult, and it does make it difficult. So in some ways, I think it's fair to ask some questions about things. But in other ways, I really just want to make sure that the board's aware that, the items in here were discussed in detail, and, that should be taken into account.
Oh, yeah. Well said.
All right, so if everyone's had their preamble, I will get right into the recommendations. The first section are under qualifications, recruitment, and promotion, and the kind of civil service law changes, adopting the village's new hiring initiative, and developing a plan to improve local candidate pool. I would say that for me, the one thing I kind of wanted to discuss was the first recommendation to amend the rule of 3 under civil service law changes. The rule of 3 was originally set up to kind of prevent nepotism and, letting the mayor hire his nephew who's not qualified and those types of things. So, I'm a little nervous about amending the rule of 3, but I also understand the spirit of why we wanted to look at changing that was, when you're stuck hiring the first 3 or, maybe a few more if there's tied scores or something in an exam, you can't find diversity necessarily, especially when a list is old. And, there's another recommendation to increase the new recruit test frequency, which I think will help, mitigate some of that risk that you have kind of stale lists. But, I think I'm happy to, look at, maybe amending the rule of 3 to the rule of 5 or something like that. But I would like to put a line in our recommendation about something about ensuring that nepotism and favoritism doesn't come back into the process unnecessarily. And I think it doesn't necessarily. Our recommendation basically says, therefore, the committee recommends the New York State find a way of creating flexibility as to who the list can include. So that's pretty generic requirement. And I don't know if anyone has any color on the additional discussions on that one. I was present for one quick discussion on it, but to me, I think if we even added some kind of qualifier to that last sentence, something like creating flexibility as to whom the list can include, while still ensuring that there isn't, some kind of, nefarious nepotism or something like that to it. Because I think that's why that rule was created, because I think if you go back, 100 years, you'd have like a whole family hired because it was, the mayor's family or whatever. So.
Yeah, we definitely spoke about that at the committee level. In fact, some of the committee members that weren't familiar with civil service law wondered why the rule of three even exists. So we did have that discussion. And I think everyone recognized that the rule of three has a purpose. So I think putting a line in there to just clarify that is certainly, I don't see any issue with that.
And then the only other comment I have on that section is the recommendation not approved, or which was to explore raising the lower age range. I think I understand kind of why that was originally brought up, because we were talking about how as people get older, they often have better judgment and things like that, which I think is raise the upper range is definitely something I'm very supportive of. But I think we have seen examples of 21, 22-year-olds joining our department or joining other departments and joining us later, that were great officers at a young age. So to me, if you can be, 18 and join the military, and, to me, it's, they're making you wait 3 more years after that. I think that, I'm kind of happy that one was not approved, to be honest. So those are my only comments on that section, and now I'll open it up to everybody else.
This is pretty obvious, but just for people who are looking at this at the first time, some of the recommendations we can take action on locally, but many of them are recommendations that would need to be adopted by the county or state. So just be mindful, as we're looking at civil service law, we can't individually as Irvington change that.
But we could make a resolution that lobbied our state legislators to do something, right? So
yep.
It's an action. We could take a soft action, but not a direct action.
Correct. And Larry, this is one of my typos, was that the Senate bill is maximum hiring age of 35 under raise upper range of candidates age. I think I gave you that one already, but did Larry just disappear?
Just said Larry Lonke is the host now on something that came across my
Larry
screen.
Schaffler said he had enough, but he's
Oh,
coming.
back. Okay, he's back there.
Now you're on mute, Larry.
I apologize. I don't know what happened here, but I'm actually working off of my hotspot now. So
No worries.
You need me to advance the screen, I imagine?
Yeah, actually it went away, so.
Oh, I'm not sharing the screen. Yeah, okay. Sorry.
I could probably do it if we need to.
No, that's fine. Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna step away and get the regular internet going again. But
Okay, but yeah, so I was just saying there was one typo on the maximum age hiring of 25 to 35. I already gave you that one earlier.
Yeah. Yep, got it.
And there's one other little minor typo on the heading, develop a plan to improve local candidate pool. There's an underline under the period.
Yep, got it.
I told you these were minor.
Okay.
Very good editor. Good.
No, that's right.
Otherwise, I'm okay with the recommendations and the one that wasn't included. I don't know if anybody else has questions or comments on this. Otherwise, I'll open it up to the public for any questions or comments.
No,
Well,
I agree with
I
you.
would concur it's all right to add your caveat. I mean, it doesn't really change, by putting in the
Correct.
Brian that you mentioned. That's fine with me. I don't think it changes the spirit of what was already approved.
Agreed. If I can actually, I don't know if I can see if anyone's raising their hand when we have the screen sharing.
Well, if you click on participants, which is up in the upper bar where the screen sharing is, you'd be able to see.
Okay. View options, there we go.
I don't see any hand raised of attendees. I think we can go on.
Okay, so let's go to, there we go. Now I can see everything. So the next section is training officer wellness. There's actually one small, right there, the red E in ensure there, Larry. That was my first typo. I want to say it before Mark got it.
Darn.
You know, I didn't actually, I thought all of these, and we could tell by the votes, many of these were anonymous, unanimous, not anonymous, unanimous. You know, I don't have any comments on any of these. So I will turn it over to you guys.
Just read, maybe you could scroll down with the screen. I mean, I'm trying to look, you know, I've read it, but Larry, can you just scroll it going?
I think Larry's working on his computer.
No, it's okay. I can do that. It's just that if you tell me which section you want to go
Oh,
to.
I don't know. I was just scrolling through this training officer wellness section that Brian has focused on, and I'm scrolling on my own little small screen, but.
Yeah, I think maybe just go through slowly so we can see the, you know, the each bold face header there, Larry. Probably go a little quicker if your computer allows it. But again, I think these were pretty, you know, pretty well supported by the entire committee.
The only one that I had any question at all in terms of potential scope and cost was the explorer development of a training library. And, you know, I'm not even sure what that would include or what kind of media you're talking about or what kind of access would be available. So I'm sure that was all discussed within the committees. And so those were my questions when I looked at it. I was trying to figure out what the scope and what the implications were.
It wasn't a terribly onerous undertaking the way it was discussed in the committee. So it really was a recognition that as departments acquire training materials, that it gets shared, and that's where we bring in the idea of a shared service agreement where there's a sharing of these materials amongst departments. So it was a pretty practical recommendation, actually.
Yeah, and that's something I feel like will be hashed out. And I thought the idea of having, you know, I'm thinking there's a lot of, you know, potential online training and things like that as well. So, but if well, I mean, we'll open this up to attendee or audience members as well if they have any questions or comments on this section. But this is a pretty benign section, I think. And I don't see any, so I will move on to safety and equipment.
I would just say that, you know, I think these wellness and training things are incredibly important. And the one implicit bias and cultural competency training, you know, I know these discussions went on at great length, and I'm glad they're in there. So yeah, we can move on.
Okay, so safety and equipment. On my version, Larry, there was no little header at the top. It was just there you go. So that's my only typo there.
Yes, Ryan, I have a box with a little shield with an exclamation point in it.
Yeah, me too.
But this is another section other than the exclamation point with the triangle with the exclamation point. I didn't have any comments on this section either. You know, and it had you know, what I think is kind of a very important next step that we've been working on for a while, which is you know, all the body cam information or section on body cams, which again was almost, you know, universally supported by the committee. And you know, from what I'm talking to the officers, you know, they're all, you know, also excited to have, you know, that equipment, so you know, they can get their events recorded.
Well, Actually-
So,
Sorry?
are you seeing the box now?
Yeah,
So, Brian, this was actually the section I had the most questions on, but it was one class of question, and that was triggered by the best practices for equipment, including new weapons. And it brought up a larger question to me about who is setting the context for the IPD in terms of what would be considered acceptable weapons for use in this community. Now, I'll give you a couple of ranges of them, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. First of all, there was a couple of years ago, there was a lot of militarization of police departments offering old military hardware like armored cars to a lot of departments around the country, which were, made use of. The offers were made use of by various police departments. Or the question of something like surveillance cameras. How many should we have, and where should they be placed, and what kind of constraints should there be on them? We have a bunch of security cameras already around Village Hall and certain other village buildings, and I'm not sure where other locations, but there's an issue of transparency and surveillance, over surveillance, that I think we have, as a government, we have to think about, not as per se as a police department. The third would be something like Stingray technology, which is technology that replicates a cell tower and intercepts cell phone calls for monitoring and for tracking, et cetera. That's been used around, and it's used quite a bit for, and I'm not saying Irvington, but it's used quite a bit around the world for what would be considered pretty much repressive and nefarious uses, whereas other times it's been used to great benefit. And I think the fourth one that came to mind was artificial intelligence / facial recognition, and how it's, while we might not have the software in-house, one could conceivably see someone making use of it informally as testing it out, quote unquote, a software interface or a service. So all of this comes to mind. So the two issues that came to mind specifically is, one, how do we address the issue of what we as a government, and in this case, I'm specifically saying the Board of Trustees in its overall role, sets a context for what kinds of equipment, et cetera, we would consider viable or appropriate for this community. And the other, more sort of a subtext here, or a subheading, is I see no reference made whatsoever to software. And there's a lot of systems out there that are not hardware per se. You get to them by a browser or to a custom app, but they're all software based, and there's oftentimes service based. So, and I saw nothing about that in this discussion. So I think the two areas that I'd suggest is, one, we need to make sure that the practices for equipment, including new weapons, whatever, there needs to be something that talks about not just hardware, but software. And secondly, the larger one, about the role of the trustees in setting a context for what's acceptable. Some of this is going to have to be a discussion that comes from the police department, from the chief to the Board of Trustees, to say, well, we're looking at this. What do you think? That would be sufficient for us to then be able to respond, rather than just finding it. And I'm not saying this has happened, but I'm just painting the worst case scenario, finding it in a budget allocation or in a purchase order without any pre-knowledge of it.
I think that, part of my take on that is, right now, there's no annual review of, equipment usage. And to me, that's kind of, to me, the way I read this recommendation is that we would look at, we maybe would have the chief come in and say, this is what our, this is the equipment we have. This is what we're thinking of buying, on an annual basis, probably around either budget time or capital budget time. And I think that that's where we could kind of cover, the bigger picture thing you said. that probably not the software side as much, but I think, you know, if they were looking to say, we want to add, you know, facial recognition to, you know, Village Hall or whatever, I think that's where we could have that conversation. You know, as you say, not just for during the budget, but almost like presenting any kind of new purchases. And I think that that's the kind of the way I looked at the, you know, the annual review of best practices for the use of equipment. And then we could also say, you know, what are other departments using or doing that we're not doing, and things like that. I think it, to me, it started the dialogue of kind of what the, you know, the best practices for equipment are.
So what does that mean in terms of an explicit edit? Because I'm not comfortable not having software and services, you know, online services not being explicitly called out as something that needs to be reviewed for best practices and for approval. So anyways, I don't know where it goes from there, except I really don't, I see that as a major flaw in this kind of, I don't read best practices for equipment, including new weapons. I don't read that as referring to any of the, you know, software cyber related stuff.
I take your point, Mark, and I'm just trying to think. I agree with you. That should be included. And I'm also noting, as I read that, annual review by whom? And, you know, you're bringing up that the Board of Trustees should know. So it wouldn't be, I mean, did this imply, maybe Larry Schaffer, you know, from the meetings, was this implication that it was an internal police review, or that it was a review that would come further to, say, our board or some, right? What was intended?
Yeah, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I think the assumption was that it was at least an internal review by the IPD. I don't think the committee was saying that the Board of Trustees had to be involved in setting policy for the IPD in terms of the use of weapons. So
I'm not talking about use of weapons. I'm talking about.
You're talking about privacy and other things.
Software. I'm talking about everything but weapons.
Yeah, the committee didn't deal with anything beyond the weapons. They didn't talk about. I mean, there are references to surveillance later on, but there was not an overall discussion about privacy and other concerns like that. Not that I recall.
Well, it seems to me that the best way is to add some sort of a thing that says either to this item, the first item, but, you know, that recommendations for equipment and software systems, you know, whatever, should be reviewed with the Board of Trustees on an annual basis or something like that. There must be some way to encapsulate the idea that we need to have a wider community input into the directions the police department are going in before they start in that direction, not after the fact.
You know, all of these recommendations, these specific recommendations, were voted on by the committee that worked on these for a very long time with the subject of multiple conversations. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't add things now, but I think we have to add them as addendum, because every single one of these was voted on by the committee with, you know, some unanimously, some had a split vote, but I don't think we can just tack on another recommendation that didn't have the benefit of this entire process. We certainly can add it, but I don't think we can stick it up here in this box as something else that was addressed by the committee, because it wasn't.
I'm fine with it being added as a Board of Trustees recommendation.
Okay. And maybe we can just do a list of those at the end.
That seems like a reasonable way to approach it.
But back to this one as it reads, annual review of best practices for equipment, including new weapons. I mean, as an internal police review, in practice, wouldn't there be some mention to you, Larry, you know, if the police were thinking of adding something, and then if you thought there was a reason for us to review it, wouldn't that come to our attention?
Well, I mean, we're kind of speculating on how we manage the village and how we manage the department. The committee wasn't dealing with that particularly. So if there's I think outside of this process that you're looking at, this report that you're looking at now, if there's a way to manage the village differently, we should consider it. But I don't think this report is the venue to discuss how the village is going to monitor, how we're going to process individual transactions in the police department. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, okay.
It's just that yeah. I mean, look, it's hard. I think the suggestions are fine, and as Janice suggested, can be summarized in some way. I have to think about the format of that. You know, having not gone through this before, I just have to think about how that'll actually be done. But overall, if the committee didn't deal with a particular topic, I don't think you can deal with it in a short window of time like you have here. You know what I mean? You may want to make note of it and then say, review this, you know, down the road. That's perfectly fine. But to come up with either new procedures or revised protocols or any of that stuff, to do that in, you know, what's going to amount to a couple hour meeting is not going to work. You know what I mean? But raising the issue is fine, and we can list it out.
I actually think that's what I was going to recommend. Kind of after the data storage recommendations, I would say, you know, other items that need to be, you know, discussed further by the Board of Trustees and/or committee, and then put in, you know, Mark's, you know, idea to look at software and you know, cyber and facial recognition and all those types of things.
Yeah, no, I'm not at all suggesting that those concerns.
Yeah.
Right. Not at all suggesting those concerns should be cast aside. We certainly should capture them. It's just that doing it in the context of this completed report that was done over 3 to 4 months is, you know, it's hard to do. Yep.
Right. That's,
It's
so if,
fine. I think as long as
if
we
we
put it-
do that,
Yeah.
and I think the process is working because the idea that this report stimulates discussions that as a board, we never might have had before, but certain issues just rise to your consciousness because of it. So I think it's a new value added to this report. And I take the point that structurally it doesn't go necessarily in here, but the fact that we're thinking about that, I think is a valuable outcome.
As long as, I agree totally, as long as we don't lose track of, there's going to be probably several of these that come forward over the course of the evening, but that aren't really, you know, weren't really considered or addressed directly. So as long as we don't lose track of them, then that's good.
Yep. So I should point out, just for everyone's benefit, that one of the committee members in the Q&A box mentioned that they thought that the assumption was that the oversight would be external and not internal, the way I had perceived it. So that clearly will indicate that there was, will indicate where the board is on that in this addendum, this list, whatever we're calling it, that you're interested in an external review. So that's fine.
Right, and not to beat a dead horse, but it's, you know, we would just like to have the recommendations brought forward so that we can review them. And some of them are going to be like, you know, very much not of no concern, and others are probably going to start to raise some flags, or potentially.
Okay.
So I think you answered.
We have there's a few hands raised.
Yep, I saw you answered Kathy's. Oh, Steve also.
I didn't. Yep. Okay. Well, we have a couple here. So John Dawson, I believe. Hold on. John?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
go. First of all, what we were discussing in committee in terms of what new weapons was all about, for the most part, were the non-lethal weapons that were being mentioned in the county report, as well as the police officers themselves discussing other things of that nature. It was never thought beyond the fact that ultimately it was the Board of Trustees who had to approve this. Nothing can be purchased, I don't care whether it's software, hardware, or anything else, without your approval or understanding of what's going on. That was never anything other than what we believed.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment.
Thanks, John. Hold on. And, okay, there we go.
Okay, so the committee is going to remain intact for a year. So I think that these things can be addressed by the committee if we can't come to a resolution now. I do have a problem with the Board of Trustees making changes without the committee's approval, being that we did spend so much time on all of this. And we never considered the Board of Trustees in any of this. And maybe we should have thought about that when we were doing it. Does the Board of Trustees have to approve everything? I mean, I think that maybe we worked under that assumption. I don't know.
So the Board of Trustees, you know, they hold the purse strings, right? So effectively, right. they approve everything. So I mean, the short answer is yes, they are responsible for everything. Now, obviously, you know, day-to-day things are delegated, but overall, purchases and implementation of anything is under the Board of Trustees' control.
Right. Okay. That's all.
All right. Thanks.
And Steve had his hand, maybe because he had also asked a question. So he asked, what about not militarizing police? For example, federal government gives military equipment and does not need to local police departments. Militarized police has usually had bad outcomes for other communities. I think Mark did touch on this, but you know, I think that was a pretty widely held view, and I think even our police department, you know, we don't think we need our own armored, you know, cars and trucks and things. So I think we all kind of agree with that assessment. Anybody else on this section? Otherwise, we'll move on to accountability and evaluation. I think to me, I had nothing to discuss about the approved or recommended items. The only one that, I mean, to me, this was the biggest item to discuss was the narrowly not recommended, which was create a civilian complaint review process. And for me personally, I actually think it's crucial to have some kind of civilian complaint review process, but I didn't necessarily, I think again, this was one where perhaps I wasn't involved enough in each meeting to get all the gist of what was discussed. But for me to have, the way I read it was going to be a local committee that would have subpoena powers, and I didn't even know how the formation of that would be possible under state law, et cetera. And also, you know, how effective that would be if we had, you know, 5 people or something that were all from Irvington. And so this is actually one that I would like to put some kind of note on, that I think this is crucially important to have some kind of civilian complaint review process that we're going to have to work on. And I do think that it said, you know, the fact that it said, you know, the preferred action would be through a shared service agreement with the County Office of Police Accountability. I think we have to kind of see how that whole process flushes out before we can really have a full recommendation. So I would like to put some kind of note that this is an area that we will continue to work on as a committee and as a Board of Trustees. But, you know, frankly, I couldn't figure out how operationally in my head it would work. So I was actually one of the ones who voted no on this, even though I think it's crucially important, and probably the biggest recommendation to come out of this is, you know, having a civilian complaint, or not even a civilian complaint, but a complaint system that everyone believes is fair. The police department, the police officers, the community, the people complaining. You know, so I think that's, you know, to me, one of the biggest things that come out of this will be that process. But, you know, I don't think we even necessarily know how we could have a shared service or have a, you know, River Towns or a Greenberg or whatever. But I think it's something that we have to continue to work on. And I would like to put some kind of wording in there that says, although this was not recommended, this is something that we're going to continue to explore because, you know, we think it's an important piece of this whole reform puzzle.
Yeah, I agree. And again, this is one of the things I was alluding to earlier that I must have missed this conversation, because as I read through it, as Brian stated and felt, it was a little confusing to me. And frankly, I don't even remember how I voted on this one, because I went back and forth many times looking at it and not having been privy to the conversation that ended up with this wording. So again, I do agree with Brian. I think the single most important thing that needs to come out of this process is that there is a complaint review process that is not solely undertaken by either the IPD or by another local police department, but that there's something that civilians can have trust in. And what that is, I think is still open to question.
So could that go in the same category that we said, these notes that are coming out of the board's discussion of this, as Janice mentioned about the other suggestion? Couldn't that be there rather than putting words in here, in this one, in the body of it?
No, I think we put a line down underneath everything, to saying that this is something we need to follow up on as a committee or as a board or both. And that's really it, but I think that kind of along Mark's thinking of, we don't want something to be missed or dropped. And I think that this is the crucial one, so.
Yeah, I mean, the more we talk about this, and I think we covered it in the last section, assembling these comments or assembling these observations, whatever you want to call them, into an addendum that the Board of Trustees, so it's a compartmentalized item that the Board of Trustees will append to this document. I think it's highly appropriate to keep it separate. The committee worked on this, obviously, and it's essentially in effect, their name's on the front cover. The committee's name is on the front cover, so it's their document, but you have to adopt it. And when you adopt it, you have an addendum. It's not I don't think you lose anything by doing that, and you won't lose sight of anything going forward.
I think it's a reasonable solution, Larry. And I also just wanted to say that I agree with Brian and Larry Lonke, that some sort of review board that has civilian input or civilian personnel is going to be important.
I agree.
Yeah, and the committee by and large recognized that. In fact, some of the officers involved recognized it as well. The committee also recognized that it would be extremely difficult to create a locally populated CCRB, Civilian Complaint Board. It's hard enough to get ambulance corps volunteers, and then to have someone needing to sit there as a volunteer in judgment of potentially their neighbors in many cases, or whatever. It's a very difficult thing. So they clearly were drawn to the idea of a countywide solution. And that's what this recommendation reflects. So anyway, just to give you some background.
And part of it, Larry, we were trying to talk through a little bit. I think it's clear to me that we need to have it to go to the county, and whether that's that the actual new county office of police accountability, it's the DA's office, it's some independent body that's formed. We have to also figure out how it gets there. So if someone has a complaint, we have to, and I think that's another recommendation is like the actual process has to be easier and anonymous, and then it has to also be evaluated before it gets turned over to that group. So I think there's a lot of pieces to figure out, but I think that it's just important to say that we have to still figure that out.
You have a hand up in the audience.
Yep, Arlene.
All right, hold on. Okay, Arlene.
I'm unmuting. Okay. I think I'm actually surprised by the outcome of this vote, but I do think that we spoke at length about civilian review, and I do think that there was overwhelming support for that. So I I think this vote is maybe only reflective of the fact that maybe people felt like they didn't have enough information on the police of, the Office of Police Accountability, but we spoke at length about having a review process. And we also, I think generally people agreed that it was more appropriate, including the police officers at the county level, because of the size of Irvington. So to me, I think that the committee was probably in line with the sort of what I'm hearing from the board about of civilian oversight. I think this is what is the Office of Police Accountability going to look like? But that makes sense to me, that vote, but not in the sense that people didn't want civilian oversight. I thought we had extensive discussions, and that was pretty clear that we were in agreement, including the police officers on the committee.
Great. So Larry, are you kind of comfortable with like the comments so far for the addendum or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I'm taking notes, and but also, what's that?
It's also recorded. I'm sure you want to go back and watch.
Well,
it.
yeah, no, I'm taking notes just generally, but in terms of putting a fine point on all the wording, I'm not sure we're going to do a group editing session tonight. But
no, I don't think that's wise.
Yeah, but I think we can. I think we'll get to the point, if the comments are similar to these, I think we can get to the point where you can vote on an addendum.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And the plan in total. So.
Does anybody else have comments on this, either from the board, on this section, from either the board or the audience? Okay.
Okay. Are you going to send this out to all of the committee members, all of these addenda?
Well, look, the process right now is with the Board of Trustees. So I don't think the board, in thinking about how this process flows, the committee did their work, obviously came up with their work product and has presented it to the Board of Trustees.
I mean, we could definitely send a copy of it, but I don't think we'll comment on it.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I just didn't think that the Board of Trustees would be able to change anything in the body. Like,
we're not.
I don't care about adding the addenda, noting that it's from the Board of Trustees, but I don't think anything should be changed in the body.
I think, no, I don't think we're doing that. I think we're
okay.
Other than a couple of typos that I've been presented with.
All right.
but Kay,
which will be corrected.
Kay, I will point out that we could vote the whole thing down and take 0 recommendations. So it's not like we don't have any control over the process. It's just that we've elected not to do something like that.
It never occurred to me. Certainly, I thought it would be presented to the Board of Trustees, but I never thought that things could be removed or audited, because this was supposed to be a committee of citizens, not of the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, but that was our decision we could have sat down as a Board of Trustees and come up with our own recommendations. We wanted to get community input to it.
Well, wait, it's a little more than that. So I don't want to belabor the point. Okay. So
all right, I'll be quiet.
Well, no, the executive order requires there to be a report developed not just by the government, but with a group of community stakeholders. So clearly the board went above and beyond that, in that they threw the whole thing into your lap, to be perfectly honest, which is great. It worked out well.
Yes.
And the committee took it on, full steam ahead. So with that, at the end of the day, the committee, like I said, has completed their work for this report. And is presenting it to the Board of Trustees. It was transmitted to them. They're at a public meeting deciding whether to adopt it or not. I am suggesting, and we've talked from the beginning, that they will adopt this plan, but there may be comments or additional observations that they'd like to modify it with, so to speak. But they're going to be put into an addendum so that the report itself still stands on its own.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're, like I said, I use the word compartmentalize. That's what we're doing. We're not, other than some typos, we're not editing this report. It's just, but we're adding on a couple of it sounds to me like there's a couple of things that the board doesn't want to lose sight of, and they want to do it in a formal way by adopting an addendum to this.
And I think that what, I'm sorry, I think the points being brought up are good points. And I think adding them separately as recommendations by the Board of Trustees makes sense also.
But yeah, I think that's where we've arrived at. And, you know,
Thank you.
There's no manual for this, by the way. We kind of, not for this part of it.
Yes.
And also, I'll answer Kathy Kaufman. She said, Executive Order 203 requires community input. It does. It doesn't say the community has to write the report that we don't edit before we send it into the governor either. We could have just had a listening session one night, and that would have been community input. We decided to go a different direction, obviously, but it's it's going to be very interesting to see how other communities did this, because I think we took a very different approach. I personally think it was the right approach, and I think it gave us the best possible result. But it wasn't the only way to do it. So you're absolutely right, Kathy. But it doesn't mean that a report had to be written by a committee that's accepted verbatim and voted on, up or down only. So. On to policies and procedures.
If there's no other
Assume there's no other
questions
comment.
here. Yep.
I didn't actually have any comments on this section. I think it's kind of stood on its own again. Anybody else did? I mean, again, there's a lot of meat in here, but to me, it's not anything that was controversial or I feel I need to comment on.
Mayor, I should just point out that everyone recognized that accreditation is critically important. Obviously, it's in here as a recommendation. But I think it was very clear from the board's budget discussions, for those that may have attended your various workshops, that the board wants the police department to pursue accreditation and in fact is maintaining the staffing in the department to allow that to happen. There's obviously a burden placed on the department, but you've made a decision to fund that, and so I don't think that's in any doubt.
Agreed.
How will revisions, or how are revisions to things like duties and responsibility definitions and the mobile app even, how are they currently indicated and how would they be in the case of the mobile app? So, rather than having to review an entire manual, how do I highlight to existing officers who have been in the department for, let's say they've been there for 5 or 6 years, they sort of know the game, what's going on, and yet there's been some new changes in policy or procedure. So I'm not saying that this needs to address that. I'm just asking a question in general. How does that information bubble up through the department?
Right. So, I mean, in terms of the mobile app, for example, it could be, it was really a recognition that the manual itself is 500 plus pages. Okay. To expect an officer to be able to recall a particular procedure during a particular circumstance, which may be covered in one of the pages in that manual, is what was a little bit unrealistic. And the committee felt that the officers would benefit by having more rapid access to information in the manual. What that actually looks like, I mean, you can see this recommendation. It's not particularly specific. It could be something simple or something more complicated, but the end goal is to make sure that the officer in a time of need can find the information that they need rapidly. That's the spirit of the recommendation. As far as the streamlining, this one's a little bit more vague, but it just simply the committee felt, as it says here, that the section is unnecessarily long and needs to be streamlined. It was real. I can't describe it too much differently than that.
And the suggested revisions are attached here, right?
The specific revisions are not attached. There's they got through the committee got through part of it, but realized they're not going to get through the whole thing.
Right, but some of the process is.
It's not attached to the report. There's the attachment. It's not in any of the appendices, but I think the goal is to streamline. So that's something that can be worked on, kind of separately from here.
Well, I like streamline. That's not my problem. But sorry, Larry, maybe you missed the core of my point, which is part of streamlining is also making sure that specific changes that may come about during the year or, over the course of a period of time are distributed and highlighted to everyone's attention. So I'm not sure what, that's not necessarily specifically this recommendation or any of them, but it seems that process needs to be thought about.
Yeah, but I think that process is kind of inherent in the functioning of the police department, but certainly in an accredited agency, that's a mandate. We have Chief Pignatelli in the audience here. If you want to ask a specific question about how things get rolled out in terms of changes in manuals and procedures and all that, let me know.
Well, I am asking that, although I don't know if it has to be part of tonight's meeting or not, but I'm just wondering if that was discussed during these discussions, because during the discussions of the updates, because it seems that would be core to streamlining things, is make it easy for someone to know where the changes are.
Right, I understand what you're saying, but this particular section is a very, very specific. It's one section out of the entire manual that has dozens of sections. So, but Chief Pignatelli has his hand up, so let me see if he can help you with the question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just to answer Mark's question real quick. One of the things I proposed in the upcoming budget, which is going to help with accreditation, which is Power DMS, is also going to take care of the mobile application, because everybody will be able to access the manual on their telephone or smartphone with that. And it's also going to push out any changes to any of the manual sections moving forward. Currently, it's just done by email and paper copies to make sure everybody gets the updated parts of the manual, but this would streamline it and allow people to access it on their mobile device immediately if needed.
Chief, thank you for that. I guess my follow-on would just be, is there any way those changes are highlighted? Because I might know there's an update to my app, but do I know what was updated? Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yes, absolutely. With the new process, it's going to tell you the exact section, and it's actually going to even compare it to your old manual to show you the highlighted new changes. And on top of it, there's even ways to set up that there's a time frame that you have to read it by, as well as taking a small quiz after reading it to make sure you understood the changes. So that function will be performed by that app pretty thoroughly.
Okay, thank you. That sounds exactly what I was wondering about.
No problem.
Thanks, Chief.
Anybody else on this? John Dawson told us to increase the staff. Obviously the chief will come up with recommendations. I think having 2 lieutenants was kind of the first on the wish list, and, getting back up to our fully staffed, our previous fully staffed amount. We've been kind of operating an officer or 2 down between injuries and retirements for a while. So we're hopeful to get back to our full contingent, and then we can evaluate if they're currently staffed properly. On to community engagement. I guess the only one that to me that I just briefly wanted to touch on was the one that was the most narrowly voted on, which was create an auxiliary police force. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea as someone who was basically in a glorified auxiliary police department with the county. But, I do think it'd be better to have it through, maybe Rivertown. So, not only just for the administrative burden, but, when I was with the county as a part-time sheriff, we had, a large area to work. So we actually got to work more, which is always better than, the limited amount of events that we have in Irvington that would probably be applicable for auxiliaries. If you did that river towns wide or Greenberg wide, it would probably make a lot more sense. But that's really my only comment. It's not really, it's not germane to approving this or not, but otherwise I'm comfortable with all of these as well.
Yeah, and the committee certainly recognized the difficulties of a small village, establishing something like this. But
I mean, Elmsford has one, but it's, Elmsford is kind of a different place. But it's not, there's not like there isn't a model. It's just a different.
I'm pleased with this section. The two comments I would make are, one, I think it was remarkable that a lot of the committee members really found out how much the IPD was doing outside of their, defined roles, and how much community interaction there was. And then the second point was how badly we were at getting that information out and how important it is to use social media. And I think that's covered in all of these recommendations. And it's shown by the votes.
Yeah, I agree with Larry's observation about that. And the failure for the word to get out to the community was a surprise to many people, but it obviously is another reason why this whole process was important. And I think it's good that it's all part of this recommendation, and it probably will make a difference going forward in how much different approaches are used to let the public know all that's going on in terms of police and community interaction.
Yep. Go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry, I just had a quick comment to say that I was happy in the formally review all IPD use of social media. I was glad to see the inclusion of the use of, reviewing and setting a policy for use by individual officers. I think that has been a problem around the country where someone has their own, private Facebook group or whatever, which is presenting totally different information than maybe the official messaging from whatever. So I think it's just a good thing that we look at that. I don't know that it's been a widespread problem in Irvington, although I've heard a couple of examples where it may have occurred. But this to me shows that people were really on top of it while they were in the middle of this discussion. The committee was really on top of it to really understand that, professional responsibility goes beyond just the department site, but goes into one's behavior personally on social media.
Anybody from the audience want to talk about this section? Otherwise, we will move on to the next, which is data, transparency, and technology. Did I have any comments on this? I didn't have anything to add to this section. I thought this, again, stood on its own. And anybody from the,
I should point out that, some of these read like fairly straightforward recommendations, but some of them required a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to really understand the practical side of these recommendations. And the committee took the time to do that. Perfect example is the one about using a business card, handing out a business card by police officers. That in and of itself sounds like a simple policy, but when you think about the practicalities of doing that and when that should be done, it's a complicated topic to make sure you get it right out in the field, so that no one's wasting anyone's time, but at the same point, no one is putting their safety in jeopardy. So anyway, it was an interesting conversation, and like I said, that's a perfect example of a simple one-liner here that took its own separate meeting to talk about. So it was a good process.
Any other, we did have a question here. How about having not just Irvington stats, but show other villages for context? I'd say we're probably open to that, but I don't necessarily know if we have, apples to apples comparison of stats. We can try to do that for sure. So it does always, obviously, and I think looking at previous years, once we have a data set, obviously is important as well.
Yeah, and I think part of what this recommendation involves, and I can scroll down to it, but the statistics that they're looking to collect aren't necessarily collected by other departments. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. So there's certain statistics that have to be collected because they're standardized in terms of, I imagine, on the state level. But the committee is looking to have additional information collected, whether it's race-based or that type of thing. And that's not always collected in other departments. So it makes the comparability a little bit difficult. But to the extent that it can be done, I think it's a reasonable suggestion. You have a comment here from
Sure.
Steve? Let's see. Steve?
Yeah, maybe recommend that, to Andrew Stewart Cousins and Tom Abenanti that the New York State take this task. I think it's more efficient that way, and it could be helpful. I mean, comparing, if you get the right people, they can show you how to use comparisons. It's not just like, okay, this village has this and this village has that, but they could really dig in and say, well, this is the size of the village, and even look at demographics and say, look, these are other villages in New York State that are similar to yours, right? And this is what's going on for them. And then show it more locally for us in Westchester. So that way we can get more of a sense, are there patterns in Irvington that are useful for us to know that maybe aren't going on elsewhere? And that could extend to budgeting as well, to look at how effectively we're budgeting, and also different costs within the police department. It's a big expense in the overall budget. Things like equipment, if we're spending way over, way under in a given category, that may be useful for for the village to consider. And also, I mean, in comparison, I don't know whether there is this. I know that, sometimes officers are injured on the job or whatnot. It'd be helpful if there's a pattern that way, either a very safe workplace or a workplace that, for whatever reason, is unusually not safe. I think that would be, so it's not just about citizens and the budget, but also about the department itself. So again, I think New York State could find a way to get localities to give them that information.
Okay.
And then provide it in a useful way back to local governments and citizens.
Great. Thank you for the suggestion. Anybody else? So Larry, what I was thinking is, could we review and adopt the plan, and then just add some wording that with an addendum that, will be included as an attachment to the plan as well. Because it doesn't, again, it doesn't really affect the plan that we're adopting. And then we can add the addendum of additional work items, basically, to the plan itself.
So, I think that's where we were headed. I think it would be helpful, again, not to hash out the exact wording, but to at least summarize right now the individual items that you would like to see in this addendum. I would also suggest that we take a summary of the comments that you received as part of this particular meeting and include that in your addendum. Again, not making a statement as to whether you're acting on it or not, but they should appear somewhere.
Yeah,
I guess they could appear in the minutes. That's a possibility. I don't know.
And we could also include the minutes of this meeting as a second addendum. If that's,
yeah, maybe that's the more, because the minutes will be permanent, obviously, and makes sense. All right, so the comments will go in the minutes, and the minutes can be attached as an addenda. Good. So with that, are you satisfied with that approach? And can we go through the list quickly to make sure that we have everything? Even though I can review the video, but I think for
I think this clarity's sake, the high level, we can go over them now, and as you say, we tweak the language a little bit on
the wording. I'm not as concerned about. I can capture that from the video for sure.
So I just want to be clear on one thing, Larry. Are you talking about two appendices, or are you talking about folding the Board of Trustees comments into the minutes of the meeting? So there's one appendix added.
I'm not sure what the difference is. Let me think about that.
Well, one would have greater visibility to the trustees' feedback.
Sure, but in terms of the plan that gets filed with the state needs to include the addendum that you adopt as part of this process. That's, I think, the way we were discussing going forward with that is we're not modifying the report, but we are attaching an addendum saying that you would like these items to be addressed in the future, whatever the right wording is. The minutes really only need to say that you adopted that. We're going to have a resolution that we'll be modifying slightly here to do that. So the minutes are only going to contain that, but the comments from the public can be put into the minutes. I think that's probably the right place for them.
All right, so just to be clear, the board comments go into an appendix that we are voting on tonight, effectively, the whole document. And then the community input that came during this meeting will be part of the meeting minutes.
The minutes, yeah.
Those be supplied with that document or just kept on file?
Well, it's permanent. Minutes are permanent, so they're not going to be lost. Whether you want to also supply them to the state, I'm not sure. That's what the mayor raised, and I'm not sure what we can. I don't think we have to decide that tonight. I'm not sure.
Fine. That's a question that came to mind.
Yeah. Because there's been other input along the way. We had 2 other listening sessions that had comments, and all of that, is not going to, we don't have to supply all that to the state,
Sure.
Okay. All right, so, sorry, let me just get myself set up here. So on the equipment section, there is a goal of wanting to address not only hardware and weaponry, but also software and having that be reviewed.
And services.
Software and services. Okay.
And actually, before that, when Brian made the comment about the rule of 3.
Yes, I'm sorry, it started in the wrong spot. You're right.
That would be in the same category, Right.
Yep,
And
we're going to ensure, yeah, that nepotism or favoritism doesn't enter into, the equation again, essentially. So, yep.
And then at
Thank
the
you.
same time that Mark made his comment, I made my comment about just considering in what way and by whom are those that section on new weapons reviewed by and how. That was the point I made up.
Yep. And your point was that it's external to the police department. You're pointing out the Board of Trustees, but it's certainly external to the police department does that review.
Right. And your point about the budget is part of that discussion. Obviously, anything that's budgeted is reviewed by the Board of Trustees.
Right. The civilian complaint process that you would like to see that recommendation, which was narrowly defeated, be considered going forward. Was there an additional point as it relates to the local civilian board? Did you want to make a statement about not being in favor of something only consisting of locals, or I'm not sure if you modified that at all?
Well, I don't know how much detail you're asking, but the idea that a small village like ours couldn't and shouldn't have that as an isolated review of just our community, and that something bigger, I think somebody from the audience brought that up too, is I think our addendum is to rethink this a little bit, flesh it out, but it doesn't mean that we reject that understanding that the committee came to about not having something that was just Irvington.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the takeaway is that it's crucially important, but we need to, we also have to get it right. So we need to think about it significantly more. And, likely it'll be outside of Irvington. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where it wouldn't, but, I think, because to me, it's the whole process from, if we have, as we discussed, Larry, if we have an app where you put in something and, who gets that? Then once that's, determined to be credible, who does that go to? And then if it turns to be credible, do you give it to the county that there's so many pieces in between that it's very hard to get that right, and I'd like to see what other communities have done similar sized and, all over the world or over, the country, all over the world, as Mayo always says. So I mean, I think to me, the big message is it's crucially important, and it's gonna require a lot of thought. It might be a 3 or 4 month process to get that right. So to me, that's the key, is getting that right and really thinking it through.
And I think that's it. I have the other comment was from an audience member, which will get captured in the minutes. So.
Okay, so what's our next step tonight?
So let's take a look at the resolution. Hold on a second here. Do you see the resolution? Did I pick the right screen?
Yes.
I only have three screens in front of me. The question of whether I picked the right one. Okay, so this is the resolution as drafted that was attached to the agenda. The whereases are basically right from the certification that the mayor is going to be signing when he files this. Much of what you see there is right from that certification. So we probably need to insert a whereas and then modify the resolved clause accordingly. So the additional whereas would be something to the effect of, and you can tell me the language you want. Whereas the village board has offered an addendum to the plan And you can expand on that further if you want to. And then the resolve would be that the Board of Trustees adopts the plan and the addendum.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Well, we didn't offer an addendum per se. What we offered was feedback to the plan, and we agreed it would come as an addendum.
Right.
okay. Well,
As per, I don't know, how do we usually say it? As per the discussion on the public meeting on 3/25, as per discussed at that meeting. I think we can trust that the amendment will reflect what Larry just reviewed.
well, no, but right, yeah, of course. Whereas the Board of Trustees,
Whereas the village board has identified follow-up items that will be memorialized in an addendum or something like that. Because we don't have them now, you know, so.
yeah,
But as per the, yes, as per this meeting.
okay, so at their meeting of March 25th, at their meeting of March 25th, 2021, the Board of Trustees has identified follow-up items that will be memorialized in an addendum to be submitted with the plan, with the plan.
Okay, so sorry, Larry, how did you conditionalize the items? How did you describe them?
Well, we did it in general terms going down.
No, I mean the phrase you just typed.
Oh, I just said, whereas at their meeting on March 25th, 2021, the Board of Trustees has identified follow-up items
Fine.
that will be memorialized in an addendum to be submitted with the plan.
Fine.
Then, resolve that the Board of Trustees adopt the plan and the addendum.
Yeah.
That seems clean.
A little clunky, but it works.
All right. Okay, so make a motion.
Up to you, not me.
I'll make a motion.
I think you can read the resolution.
I'm gonna read the resolution as well, but so I was just rewriting that a little bit here. So I was going to throw that in, Larry, after the after the second whereas, after the plan to produce such deployments.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, I'll take a shot at it. How's that? Whereas the Village of Irvington has performed a comprehensive review of current police force deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices in accordance with Executive Order number 203, issued by Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on June 12, 2020. And whereas the Village of Irvington has developed a plan to improve such deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices. And whereas the Village Board at its publicly held meeting on March 25th identified follow-up items to be memorialized in an addendum to be submitted with the plan. And whereas the Village of Irvington has consulted with stakeholders, including but not limited to membership and leadership of the local police force, members of the community, with emphasis in areas with high numbers of police community interactions, interested nonprofit and faith-based community groups, and local elected officials regarding the plan. And whereas the Village of Irvington has offered the plan in draft form for public comment to all citizens, and prior to adoption of the plan by the Village Board of Trustees, has considered the comments submitted and resolved that the Village Board of Trustees adopts the plan and the addendum. Good enough?
I think you got it.
All right, so then I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Woohoo!
Well, I think I would like to thank again the board, but Mayo Bartlett, Maria Imperial, and Larry, for all of your tremendous leadership, your writing, your editing, your keeping us on task. Just coming up with the meeting dates was kind of a Herculean task at sometimes. It was during the holiday season. It's during COVID. I think in some ways the Zoom setup did help to get us all to a room somewhere. Would have been very difficult, but I think that it was unbelievably efficient, even though there was a lot of meetings and a lot of hours. There was a lot of work to be done. I mean, to come up with, was it 50?
59.
59?
56.
59. Who's counting? But, you know, almost 60 recommendations, you know, have almost 30 people on a committee. It's hard to get 30 people to do anything. You know, so it's been great. And, you know, it's also been great to work with, you know, a bunch of people that I hadn't frankly worked with on other committees, to hear from, you know, people in the community that I hadn't, you know, heard from before, you know, so I think that we also achieved our goal of getting, you know, really good community input. And I think the greatest evidence of that is how widespread the participation in the community survey was. You know, I think we had, what, 4,000?
Over 1,000, 1,100 almost, yeah.
Yeah, over 1,000 people, you know, filled out that survey, including, you know, from high school kids to senior citizens. You know, I think we had pretty widespread participation. And, you know, to me, I think, you know, maybe I was slightly disappointed that we didn't have, you know, more comments during the open period. But, you know, I think a lot of people felt they were heard with the survey already. And you know, I think, you know, I feel very good. I think we were hopeful we'd get to this point, but we actually got here. And, you know, it feels really good to, you know, with 5 days to spare, you know, we're kind of done with a product that I would, you know, I'm very proud of. It's not, we didn't half-ass it, and we didn't, you know, just put something together at the last minute. We were as thoughtful as we could be in a very short time frame, you know, and a lot of that is because of yourself, Mayo, and Maria. So just want to thank you guys one more time.
As someone that was more outside of the process, I want to say that I was totally impressed by the quality and the depth of the resulting recommendations. So thank you to everyone.
Good.
Great. So I will make a motion to adjourn if I can have a second.
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 All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks again, everybody.